Hi, everyone. Good to see you and welcome today. I'm so excited speaking with you, David, today on, of course, your human capital trends, what you have been guiding in the last year. So excited to sit down with you today and have this conversation. But before we jump into the larger, the main topic of closing the experience gap, I would love to take if you can take a moment, David, to set the stage and help the audience a little bit more to understand what the major themes you have uncovered in this year's Global Human Capital Trend Report.
Sure, thank you. And thanks to Eightfold for having me back. I would love to get out and tell the story of the human capital trends. As introduced, my name is David Mallon. I am the head of research for our human capital practice in the US. And one of the many hats I get to wear, one of the ones I enjoy the most is my involvement every year in our human capital trends research. So this is, we like to think, the sort of largest and longest look at essentially what are the big issues in human capital? What's changing how we approach how we manage our workforces, how we work with the people who work for us. I always like to describe it. Some of you may have heard me if you've heard me talk before, you may have heard this. We use this metaphor. It's not looking at the future. It's not predictions. It is much more of trying to understand currents. I think you've all probably, I suspect, had that feeling of maybe you were you were at the beach or you were in a river or something, and you felt the current pushing you somewhere. That's what this is. It's about now. It's about the currents that are pushing us into different places with regards to all things work and workforce. And it's important because if we can understand those currents, if we can name them, and we can actually get better at describing them and telling stories about them, then we can also be more intentional about them. We can actually use them to push us in directions, to drive us into directions that we want to go. And so that's kind of the point of this every year. This is, as you see here, the kind of top level idea behind this year's report is turning tensions into triumphs. We, for the last couple of years, have been looking at this notion of sort of boundarylessness in organizations. Every year when we do these trends, there's some kind of broader themes that we anchor to. And for the last couple of years, it's been that, there's a lot of the basic assumptions or definitions, words, the language that we used when we talk about how organizations work, have themselves become, harder and harder to kind of to define. So, for example, what is work? What is a job? How is that evolving? Who's in the workforce? Where does work happen? These are so fundamental questions, and yet the boundaries between what is one job versus the other is not even the best way to think about how to define work. The boundaries just get sort of more and more fluid by the day, and that of course creates anxieties, but it also creates opportunities. And in this year, we were kind of diving into, to realize those opportunities. We're finding that leaders are realizing that there are tensions pulling them into different directions. And how do we sort of understand those tensions? How do we look at how to help leaders sort of get off the fences, the sort of wait and see that we've kind of been in, given sort of the turbulence around us? What can we do about that? So this year's report is taking that notion of boundarylessness and that notion of sort of tensions and trying to dig into, okay, so in the various issues that this year's trends represent, where are the decisions that we need to make, and sort of how can we best make them? And how we do that through a lens of what we call human performance, which is one of the, kind of, I guess, sort of biggest tensions is how do we make decisions to both drive the business outcomes, organizational outcomes that we have to have, think growth and cost and speed and innovation and so forth. But at the same time, the human outcomes that we need, think well-being or trust, because we firmly believe, and our research has sort of shown over time, that these two things are actually multiplicative. They're not in competition. And the more that we can do both, the more that we get overall performance in the organization. Now, I've used if my guess is if you're in the audience today that you're probably familiar with our human capital trends research, but I mentioned it being kind of the largest, longest look at these currents in human capital going. We've been doing it for well over a decade. Um, uh, each year it gets a little bit bigger, but it is very much a global story, very much global research. You see here, 13,000 respondents into our surveys in almost 100 countries around the world. It's very much a global story. And it's a very executive audience. About a third of our respondents are actually identified as in C-suites or board of directors. So it is not just us taking, collecting data from what you might imagine to be an HR audience. It's actually very much a business and executive audience, and that I think is really important. So, with that, a couple more words about just sort of off the top about this year's report. I talked about the notion of tensions. Um, if it feels like it's sort of hard to be a leader today, it is. We are surrounded by uncertainty. Those boundaries between what is work and workforce, et cetera, those the disappearing nature of them does create, well, for many leaders, it's suddenly unstable. Like I knew how to make decisions in a certain world, and now maybe that's harder than it once was. And there are these pulls to go in different directions. Do we use, for example, AI and technologies to automate, or do we use them to augment? How much should we be trying to personalize for the experiences of our customers and our workforces, or how much should we be trying to standardize so we can go fast and be efficient? Um, do we focus on predictability, sort of trying to make sure that we understand what's in front of us, or do we focus on potential, given the amazing things that technologies could do today? Those are just a few. And navigating these tensions we talk about in the study this year, it's not about picking a side. It's about finding the balance between these, given the questions in front of us, given the particular challenges that we're facing. And I would invite you to kind of think about these kinds of balances, finding balances, when we actually dig a little bit further into one of the trends today, which is the experience gap. So, if you do go, just a quick word about the report. If you do go and look at it, or maybe you even already have, um, let's see. There we go. Um, you're going to see that it is digging into how we, navigate these tensions to make decisions. You're going to see that we are talking to leaders at all levels, not just the executives, but at all levels around how do we not just focus on business outcomes, or not just focused on human outcomes, but do both. And how we do that in the right ways, how we treat decision making as a discipline, how we make sure we have the right data, et cetera. You'll also see that we have organized the trends into some categories, some that have something to do with work, some that have something to do with the workforce, some that have something to do with the organization. I will tell you, because every time we talk about this, people ask, but I wouldn't have categorized that trend in that category. Yeah, we know. It was meant to be a little bit, make it easy to work with. Some of them could be in all three categories and probably are. That said, here are this year's trends. Given today's topic and time, we don't have time to go through them all, but I will just sort of quickly highlight, kind of some of the ideas behind them. In that first column, you see us talking about leaders want to go fast and be agile, but the workforce is saying it's kind of crazy. Can we slow down and actually anchor ourselves? And that really is this is our notion of stagility. We've invented a word there, but how do we create better anchors in the organization for workers so that paradoxically they can go faster, so that they can thrive in all the disruption and change around us. Um, Similarly, we all know these days our lives are busy, we're constantly interrupted, etc. We know that fairly often work just seems to get in the way of work. So what can we do about that? How can we reclaim a bit of capacity in the work that's in front of us? Given all things AI, they see the ones in the middle, it is changing work. It is changing what it means to be a worker. And what we're realizing is that organizations are needing to kind of stop and rethink, wait a minute, what's in it for the worker? Why would a worker work in an AI-enabled organization? That's this notion of sort of thinking a bit differently about a value proposition. Today's topic is the experience gap. We'll skip that one. in all of this, we are making different decisions about our investments in technology. We talk a bit about sort of how that's shifting. You see the ones on the right. We are also rethinking questions of performance management. That's an ongoing, seemingly never-ending conversation of how do we better understand performance? What is the future role of managers in organizations? And then when it comes to change, how are we motivating? How are we thinking differently about how we motivate people in the organization, especially given our ability now to know them at sort of finer grain levels, much the same way that we do our customers. So it just kind of gives you a quick overview. With that, I'm going to stop here, and I think we'll start to dive into the conversation today, which is the experience gap. What you're seeing here on the slide, maybe just I'll point out what's going on. Well, I said that the point of this research is we look at these currents and we try to figure out how to name them and do something with them. One of the kind of simplest things that we're gathering in our research is simply, well, which of these is sort of most top of mind? Call it urgency or importance. And then where are organizations on the journey of doing something about it? And that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing this set of all the trends, and you're seeing the big lines are essentially some notion of urgency or importance. So these are the sum of the companies that said this is a really important thing for us, or it's top of mind for us. And the smaller, darker green line is those that are at least trying to do something about it. And the very small blue line are those that feel like that they're actually, moving the needle. They're actually generating outcomes. Given today's topic, and I'll bring Theresia back into the conversation, you see it at the bottom. And it's interesting as we've watched this one. This report came out essentially back in February. And as we've seen this notion of the experience gap play out since then, it's become a very big topic in the news and in media and so forth. But back when we were collecting this data last fall, it was sort of under the radar. Not necessarily, it wasn't something that many companies were. Well, you still see, a sizable number still said it was important. It made our list, right amongst the things that didn't make the list. It made our list, but it was kind of an emerging issue. And yet maybe it's not so emerging anymore. And we'll talk about that along the way.
Yeah. And David, honestly, I loved your equation you put in the beginning, the business outcomes multiplies by the human outcomes to really think about human performance. Because I think anyone on this call today has some kind of this tension already of we are asked to do more or grow faster, be more profitable. But in the same time, of course, we as managers are the ones who are put in a position of how do we build trust with our employees? How do we make sure that they are also empowering and welcoming those new innovation. And I think especially with the experience gap, I know we dive into it a little bit more. I think that tension becomes even more clear. But I know we spoke when we connected before this webinar quite a bit on this one here because I think the knowing and doing gap is such an interesting one because I think everyone can like understand it that yes, I know this is a problem, but it's really hard to get into the doing. And I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts on what is preventing those leaders today to do anything about it? And obviously, you already said some of these have already changed since you have published this report. So just curious of like, what are the changes you have seen already? And then, of course, also, what is something of where the leaders feel like they're prevented of doing something while they're acknowledging there might be a problem?
Or, well, I mean, to some degree, the answer to that question is different for each of these trends, or at least
Mm,
somewhat different. But we do ask a version of that question, and we're collecting the data. And it would not surprise you to know that sort of, some of the common barriers or obstacles can be things like, internal constraints, like maybe the internal culture of the organization or its structures, et cetera. Those are the kinds of things that sometimes prevent us from going fast. It can be external constraints, meaning like customer expectations, regulations, etc. It can also be just more simply a lack of alignment. Maybe leaders don't necessarily align around thinking that it's something that should get prioritized. It can be a lack of resources. It can be a lack of know-how. Do they have the capabilities to do anything about it? Um, and actually, the most interesting one that comes up fairly often, and it should just be called out, is in many cases, like in the case of the experience gap, they just didn't understand the issue.
mm,
Um, they didn't, many organizations basically just said, we don't know enough about this to know what to do with it. So, all those things could be, are amongst the possibilities. I would say, as a general rule, it would, again, probably not surprise you to know that those that really speak more towards the things that are truly disruptive. So, for example, being able to understand this new value proposition and what it means to work in an AI-enabled organization. That is one where it was probably more on the side of we just don't understand the issue or we don't have the capabilities to do anything about it. Um, but for example, the one about when reclaiming organizational capacity. So when work gets the way of work, it is more not surprising going to be more internal constraints, like our kind of our structure, our culture, sort of just we get in our own way.
Yeah. I always like to say internal problems are better problems than external problems because internal problems you can actually action on and do something about it. But one of the things you said, David, around the experience gap, some of them don't even know what that means and what it is about. So I think that's a great segue for you to introduce a little bit more in detail the trend you have, of course, included in this report, closing the experience gap. So if you walk us through a little bit more what you have found out throughout speaking with those leaders, what that means and what are the impacts for the business.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Well, so the short of it is, if a perennial issue in organizations is, do we have the talent that we need? And it's not just an issue, it's one of those issues that's not just something that, our folks in the audience that might be on the HR side, they're very familiar with it. They hear it all the time. But it's also an issue that is usually fairly, shared by the non-HR population, the business executives, the organizational executives, the all the way down to supervisors and hiring managers. There's just, the right, do we have the right talent? And perennially, when we or others do surveys on that, not surprising, many organizations say, yeah, no, it continues to be a struggle. We sometimes struggle to find the skills that we need. We sometimes struggle to find the particular talented people that we need. But in digging into this year and what became this trend, we began to realize that yes, that's still a challenge, but something has shifted about the way it's being talked about and the why of it. So increasingly, organizations are not just saying we can't find certain skills. They're saying we can't find experienced
Mm.
talent. We can't find the experienced people that we need. As we dug into, okay, that's interesting. What does that mean? We realized actually there's a bigger problem here than people realize. Part of the challenge is that organizations think that what they need from their talent is shifting quickly. So essentially, what they're realizing is that we don't just need that our people show up with a certain skill. We need them, especially in a very fast-moving, disrupted world. We need them to show up with that skill and be able to be adaptive related to it, express judgment related around it.
Mhm.
And our own so far, our only means of sort of articulating that, because we're as most hiring managers not very good at actually describing that, was to say, oh, I need experienced people. Because there's a
Mm.
bet then. If I have somebody who has 5 years of experience, I'm betting that in that 5 years they've learned how to express judgment around those skills. I'm betting that on somebody else's dime, they've kind of figured out how to be adaptive. But simultaneously, there's a bigger problem on the candidate side, on the worker side, is that increasingly in organizations, we're getting rid of the places where we previously have let talent grow into that experience. And so this weird paradox or challenge is happening where our data and others would say increasingly more and more organizations are asking for a certain number of years of experience, including oddly enough for jobs like, for example, Gen AI. You see far too many job recs basically saying that they want 5 to 10 years of experience in generative AI. And I suspect folks realize the joke in that pretty quickly. There are no people with 5 to 10 years of experience in generative AI, but it's just how we think, right? Meanwhile, organizations increasingly have fewer and fewer of those entry-level jobs. So if you're a candidate, especially recently, if you're a college graduate and you're thinking, okay, all the jobs I'm applying for say I have to have 5 years experience, but none of them are the kind of foothold roles, entry level roles where I could gain that experience. What do I do about it? And
Mhm.
this trend is really about digging into how companies are trying to solve both of those problems. Where does the experience come from? How do I close this gap? And then sort of where do workers develop what is needed? I will say off the top before we dive into the next bit is that part of it is just also digging into what does experience mean in the first place and resetting our expectations.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack, and I think this is such an important topic. And I think over the year we have seen a lot of organization haven't acted on the business outcomes, right? How can we introduce AI to automate certain tasks? And often that is the early career task, right? Where we feel trusted that AI can do that of summarizing a presentation or something like that. And that, of course, takes away some of the need of an early career where, as you said, normally is the place where you learn and have that experience. So before we move into the data you have shown here, I know we have a poll out here. Just reading out, I think you have all that poll in front of you. And the poll asks you, what do you think contributes most to the experience gap? Now, if you take your time, I would love to hear from you. If you think it's the job requirements that overemphasize experience, the limited access to the job on the job learning, lack of early career or development roles, or rapid technology change outpacing learning. So give you all a few seconds, and then we will review your results and kind of see what you have been all thinking, especially around the experience gap. He looks that David, if you see it, it looks very and you are the expert on trends and data. So I think a lack of early career and development roles has risen on the top, followed with a rapid technology change and outpacing learning. And I think some of that you have already mentioned, David, and I, of course, also just mentioned it. It's moving, so I don't want to influence it too much.
It's yeah, the other options are making a comeback, I think.
Yeah, there are.
Uh,
Let's give everyone maybe 10 more seconds to decide. 3 more seconds. I think we can close it.
so I think, folks in the audience picked, there's definitely people who picked one of all four. So it's not like any didn't have any answers, but certainly lack of early career roles is key. It is, and it's definitely part of the story. I would also argue that the other three are important parts of this story too. We'll kind of get to that along the way. In particular, I'm going to spend a bit of time on that first one, of just sort of what we are overemphasizing experience, and we should probably unpack it.
Yeah. And I think we can jump back to the slides there because I think you bring a lot of good data in there. And I think there's something, as you said before, and I just want to emphasize this one more time, is that I think the organization don't know how to assess those experience. As you said, if I have somebody who has 5 years of experience, I assume they're adaptable. I assume they have critical thinking. I assume they know how to have a presentation, conduct a presentation or
That's right.
write a brief. And I think that is such an interesting point. So walk us through a little bit more of the data you have seen, and of course, again, what it means really for the closing the experience gap.
Sure. And I'll start with the answer that the majority picked, which is just entry-level roles. We are seeing across industries and sectors, um, uh, you can kind of this point maybe can sometimes be a little bit overblown, but it was more common in the past that companies would have, organizations would have places where you could come into an organization with less experience. You could kind of grow into that organization. So think, almost it's somewhat cliche, but think the mailroom or the call center or or working on the front line somewhere in a shop or what have you, right? But there was this notion that there were roles where someone who could demonstrate competency in other ways, or just simply show up with a degree or whatever it is. There's ways to get started, and then that would be the stepping stone. That would then let you grow into higher order roles. But increasingly, those foothold roles aren't there, and they're kind of going away quickly. And this is where AI is probably both part of the problem and it will potentially be part of the solution because because technology and automation are one of the reasons why organizations feel like they can get by with fewer of those roles. Other things in today's world, that we all tend to work now, many of us anyway, tend to work now across distances with lots of, uh, maybe people in other parts of the world, or being on Zoom calls like this one. That traditional notions of internships and apprenticeships and so forth have also. It's not that they haven't gone away. There's actually a renewed interest in them, but they become they're harder to do. There's been this sort of
Mhm.
notion of sort of apprenticeships being harder to do, which speaks to this the sort of lack of developmental experiences. So all of this is creating this gap, which is what we're calling the experience gap. It's as you saw off the top of the knowing doing data, it's not widely understood. Although as we saw, got to the back in essentially sort of April, May, June, that sort of season of college graduation, we saw a lot of attention being given to the challenges that college graduates are having to find jobs. And it speaks a lot to this problem because they're coming out with strong technical skills, think STEM and such, but they're not necessarily coming out with the precursors of, as you described, some of the things that you just need people to know how to work together, to know how to solve problems, know how to sort of adapt, right? They're not coming with those, and there aren't ready roles for them to step into to gain them. Um, that said, as we've dug into this, we've watched it happen. That we do know one of the other things that we tested on is that we've and something we've been talking about for a while, and it speaks to what I'll get to in a second about unpacking experience. Is we saw many of the executives in our study tell us they do understand the need to prioritize human capabilities, or people use different terms for them. We call them human capabilities, some call them human skills, soft skills, power skills, but notion things like empathy and curiosity and divergent thinking and so on, because many executives told us they get that those need to be prioritized because, and this is this leading up to what is experienced, because those are actually what creates judgment. That's where the adaptiveness comes from. And so even though they didn't necessarily understand the experience gap as an issue, even in our survey data, the executives were beginning to say they kind of got the underlying problem, which is how do we hire for that? How do we hire for those human capabilities? How do we source for them? How do we develop them, et cetera?
I want to touch on that and bring out an example in from Eightfold. And for those who don't know Eightfold, we are a AI native talent intelligence platform helping organization to manage a talent journey. And I think one of the things which are really important is these days having that insight of, you spoke about skills, right? But organization these days, especially with the changing needs of work and also the roles, it is a question of what do I actually need? What skills do I actually need? And of course, that often transfers to what experience do I need? But we come to that of breaking it down why you don't always need to go back to experience to identify who might be the right fit candidates. Um, and I do think that's important because these days it's not just having that insight, but also the ability to action on that insights. We just spoke about the knowledge and the actions gap, right? And I think that is important because just having that data is not enough these days. And one of the organizations we work with is Vodafone, and they really came to us and said, we want to become a skills-based organization. We really need to understand on the first place what skills do we have even in the organization, but also what skills do we need tomorrow, and then really understand which one do we need to upskill, reskill, to really make sure that they're redeployed within the organization, and making sure that the workforce is much more agile and diverse to react on some of those, as you also mentioned, David, external factors where we are forced to react to it and solve for it. And some of that, which I found incredible results, is that they see 67% increase in learning hours per employee. And I think that is important because one of the things you mentioned, and especially if you think about it for early careers, yes, they might still have internships. Maybe they find and land their first early career job. These days, if they are forced to do remote jobs, it is not the same learning. So how can you help them to action the learning where they need it the most, which is custom to them? And that is only possible if you understand where are they in their journey What do they have already? What is transferable skills? And what are the skills we as an organization need so that you push those kind of information towards those employees? But the employees can also pull that and say, hey, I feel like I've not the ability to do that critical thinking as much as I would like to, or present in front of my management as much as I want to, so that they can find it and it's really customized to them. Because then we see the action and that we see the results for the organization and for the human, right? And that I think, as you said before in the beginning, David, that is the win-win situation between the organization will get a skill they need, but also the human, the person is embracing that change because it is also benefiting them in their journey. And that is again, I love that equation you shared in the beginning. That is, I think, where the benefits of the human performance come in.
Yes, agreed. The thing is, this gap, this riddle is, how where does a worker get experience? Where does the organization find the experience that they need? As you have said, and I think that the case you just shared shows, part of solving this for this riddle is just sort of questioning the basic assumptions we're making. Um, that maybe it's not experience that we need. Maybe it's not 5 years of experience. Maybe it's just that we know where we know how to, or we try to evaluate those human skills. We know how to operationalize the development of them in the organization. We even in the context of a particular technical skill, like we know because of the job that we need some kind of technical skill, that we are at least looking for. We're expanding our horizons, so we're where we can, we're not necessarily relying on old proxies like degrees.
Hmm.
Unless, I mean, there's certainly, obviously, there's some cases where there's some kinds of roles, there's some, where it might be regulated or it might require some sort of standard or certification, what have you. That's fine. But you see more and more organizations sort of realizing we were probably asking for those degrees just because that's how it's always worked, not necessarily because we absolutely needed a 4-year degree. But again, much like the 5 years of experience, the 4-year degree is just a bet. It's a proxy. And the idea is if you've been through a university and gotten a 4-year degree, and then if you've gone to work somebody else for 3 to 5 years, I can trust that, or I can make the bet that you've learned some degree of judgment and that somebody else has taught you how to think. Well, in the world in which we're in, a lot of the solution here, and you see this in some of the case examples that are on this slide and that we talk about in our research, is that organizations sort of realizing actually the solution here is to stop making those assumptions,
Hmm.
to stop using those proxies. Let's actually figure out, how can we understand how or assess for in our sourcing processes for those human skills? How can we assess for some degree of judgment or adaptability? How can we test for that the skills are there at a level of granularity lower than a 4-year degree? Because then that expands our horizons. It expands the possible sources of talent. Um, it creates actually opportunities for folks even that are already in our organizations if we do that. That can grow into roles that we wouldn't necessarily have thought they could grow into. But because we're getting better, and the good news is that we have technologies, for example, like Eightfold to help with this, because we now have the ability to see more granularly into work, to better understand work, to better understand what goes into it. We can, as you see here, we can begin to rethink what experiences means in on the sourcing side. We can think differently about how we use internships or partnerships with higher ed. We can think differently about how we use apprenticeships. There's one of the examples we talked about in the report. There are now experiments or pilots going on in parts of the world where you could become a medical doctor, not from a degree, but from an apprenticeship. Because we're getting smarter about actually understanding the work and what goes into it. And, so that it's what's allowing us to think differently about things. I
And
mentioned AI being before being part of the problem, but also part of the solution. AI also has the potential to help us do some things that heretofore have been really hard, which is, for example, to part of experience is also the just tacit knowledge that builds up in people's heads, that just sort of how things work, that just learning the backstories and the back channels, learning just sort of the all the little things that no one teaches you ever until you've just been there for a while.
Yeah.
AI actually has the ability to help us also harvest that. And you see the example here about culture, about how to harvest that and bring it to employees faster. So it helps to stand them up in organizations more quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said something really, really important. AI might be part of the problem, but also part of the solution. As I mentioned before, a lot of early careers might be sitting in their own home, not having their exposure as much as we have possibly benefited from our early careers of mirroring and listening to others. But AI is also the ability, like something we are developing and working with our customers at Eightfold is give everyone an AI coach, customized to your needs, to your skills, based on the information from your organization, really customized of what it's needed in your role. And I think one other thing you mentioned, and especially for early career, sometimes it's hard to find where to even start. If you think about the role as an analyst, that could be a financial analyst, it could be a marketing analyst. And if you're just starting for looking for a job, it's really hard to distinct of where does my skills, my skills I acquired throughout university, through internships, might be beneficial. So one of our customers, Boston Scientific, they are using Eightfold in order to simplify the hiring experience, but also improve the candidate experience, and of course, increase internal mobility. And what they have done is that you can upload basically your profile, you can upload your resume as a candidate even, and see what are fitting jobs. And that might be in a department you haven't even thought of. And that is, I think, really important because it is no longer that the candidate needs to exactly know which role might be the one they're looking after. It is also a way for the organization to showcase them where other spots in the organization they're able to contribute and grow into. And one of the things we have seen with that, they had these AI customized, personalized job recommendations sent to candidates and internal employees and external candidates. And they have seen that the 84% of applications who received these AI recommendations completed the application. And that's led to a 53% of an increase in the overall application conversion rate. And that is important, right? Because that means organizations will see a good fit candidate, and a candidate will understand where am I a good fit and open up a door to other roles they haven't might not even thought about it in a different department where their skills are still very valuable.
It's a that just understanding possibilities is I think is so much part of this story. Just using data we have in our hands to better understand the work and better understand the possibilities. It goes so far for the organizations like Boston Scientific, the decisions they're making at the organization level, but even more importantly for the workers themselves to sort of better understand possibilities.
I
Um,
keep, yeah, there's so much opportunities these days, right? The jobs have changed so
yeah.
much. There are different roles, and I think many of us, myself definitely included in this, I would have not imagined, and you might have picked up on my German accent, that I might have ended up as a customer success director in New York 10 years later. So I think there's so much opportunity these days. There's so much mobility and so much we can learn for free online, but also thanks to our organizations. And that opportunity and that path is not, as we have seen always in the past, very streamlined. These days, there is much more different opportunities, and that giving that information back to especially early candidates is really critical so that they can find their path and the opportunity which are out there. Now, move us forward to the next slide.
Yeah, no, but I think, and we've touched on this now, this core concept, I think a few times. But picking up on what you just said, it is there's a reason. Let's not, give ourselves a little bit of patience and grace. There's a reason why historically we've had these proxies. There's a reason why we required 3 to 5 years of experience. There's a reason why we required a 4 year degree. There's a reason why that we have used these stand-ins because up till now, one, the world was moving a little bit slower, so it was okay that the job rec didn't exactly match the work, it still was generally workable enough to make some decisions around be fit for purpose, etc. Um, so that was okay. It was okay that that we, you know, didn't need that we that the talent market was such that it was okay that we could ask for 3 years of experience, and if it was challenging to find the exact candidate we need, okay, so be it. We, it was okay. We could make it work. Um, but in today's world, that's the story here. It's the world does go faster. It is more complicated, and we are missing opportunities ourselves, the degree to which we continue to use these proxies. And our opportunity as an organization and for our individuals is to just sort of unpack and sort of get past, quite frankly, what made sense in the past, but now is really a bit of laziness on our part. Um, to Rather than just default to, okay, I want a 4 year degree and 5 years of experience, let's actually get to what we really want. Let's actually get to what we really need. Let's figure out how to assess for that. Let's figure out how to grow that. Let's figure out how to develop that. And then for candidates and for workers out in the marketplace, and especially for, I'll say, I mean, I've got two teenagers who are in high school and going to be headed off to college at some point in the next few years, and they're going to need to make choices about sort of where they what degrees they might go after, sort of where they what developmental experiences they choose. Is also, we now have the ability to provide them with more guidance to make better choices, even as they're engaging those educational experiences, so that they come with the precursors of the judgment and adaptability and the ability to work with others in the organization, the teaming and collaboration and empathy and so on. We have now the ability to unpack these things, to better understand them ourselves, and then to better give guidance to both our leaders who are making decisions. So our leaders don't necessarily say, oh, I can't find the experienced talent I need. We have the ability to arm our leaders with the data to be able to say, actually, that's not the problem. The problem is I need the sources of talent in the marketplace to give me something different. And I'm going to start to exercise influence over, for example, post-secondary education, to push in those directions, to begin to actually focus those funnels in ways that are useful to us as organizations. We also have then again the opportunity to give that guidance to our workers and our candidates, so they're quite frankly they're putting their time and attention to stuff that's likely to be valuable.
Yeah. And I think a lot of employees do want to be future-proofing their own careers, right? And I think,
That's right.
David, you mentioned this before. We have now the demand of 5 years of Gen AI experience. This is something we might have not known in the past, and things are changing much faster than they used to be. So to your point, absolutely, there has been a reason why we have asked all this experience, but the world is moving faster than ever before. I think one of the example I can think of Bristol Myers Squibb, they had a huge pharma acquisition, and all of a sudden they had cell therapy in their business, and they needed that particular skill. And again, that meant, of course, the organization also needed to be changed. Of who are we hiring? Who is going to reskill? How do we approach that talent? There's all that kind of shift happening. So there is on one side the fast moving developments of skills being changed in general, because now we need Gen AI, and we need how to prompt correctly and how to critically think with AI and how to work with AI. But on the other side, the external world is also changing. There are acquisitions happening. The economics are changing faster than ever before. And that is something where we need to, again, what you said so beautiful in the beginning, how do we find that balance between the business and, of course, the employee, to make sure everybody's a winner and embracing those changes and not leaving them behind? And especially on today's topic, also the early careers, where I think you said it so beautiful of saying it is not no longer that you have to think in that framework of, I need somebody who has 3 years of experience to get that skill. And it might be that you can find that skill in a different way and position it differently in order to take that experience away and really just focusing on what you need and what the candidate really has. I do think we have one poll, and then we can slowly but surely jump into our Q&A, David. So we start with one poll, everybody can answer again. And then if you have questions, you can also put them in our Q&A session so we can answer any of your personal questions of the topic we discussed today. So you see the poll here again. So I'm just reading it out. Which potential benefit of closing the experience gap feels most compelling for your organization? And this one I'm very curious to hear. One of the options you have is expanding the available talent pool, improving retention and mobility, driving diversity and inclusion, or strengthening long-term workforce readiness.
It's most compelling, right? So what do I think is the most compelling?
We have learned
Up
not to
to,
give too much away in the beginning and give everyone to respond.
yes, yes. It's changing fast.
Yeah, interesting. Well, we give everyone another five seconds. Huh? I feel like if I give another 5 seconds, it might be another winner.
Last minute reset.
All
Um,
right. Two, three, two, one, and we close the poll.
yeah,
And
so I mean, so many of those, obviously, I think the lines between these four options are not exactly distinct. I mean, they all overlap a bit.
Mhm.
The, you might argue that the ta available talent pool and the long-term readiness are sort of more about the sort of medium and long-term future versus retention is kind of about now. Um, so I'm actually interested. I am interested in the fact that retention and mobility was actually as it turned out, finished at the top. Um, that says something about, I think, kind of like where also the work labor market is, and where most organizations are being particularly stingy right now with hiring. So which means that they kind of have to figure out how to keep the people they have, and to grow and develop and make the best use of the people they have. So that's probably my explanation for that. It's interesting though to me that that was the top.
Yeah. We just published a blog entry on a study we have conducted a few weeks ago, which I found extremely interesting. So with Eightfold, the organization have the ability to calibrate a role, which means kind of defining AI, what good looks like. And then there's a match score for potential fit of the candidate. And we have been seeing that the higher the match score, the longer the retention and the likelihood for a promotion, which is, of course, a good indicator for a right fit candidate. And that is, of course, for me, someone who has been in the HR tech space their whole career, is such a beautiful thing because it does bring talent acquisition and talent management together. Are we getting the right people in the spot who there's no regrettable attrition, anyone who's leaving below a year, but then actually be able to grow and stay with the organization? I think that is such a beautiful way of bringing the talent acquisition leaders and the talent management leaders together. But then again, also learning from that candidate experience. Hey, David, I understand all your skills now, and here are, once you're onboarded, here are all the opportunities you have to grow and upskill, or also find another position within the organization what might benefit your long-term career goals. So I think that is just incredibly interesting, and I think we have so much potential this time around, which makes it, as you said, AI might have started as a problem in some of these, but also has so much potential where we can help and drive change, making it really personalized in a way we could have never done before. So I'm very excited about that. All right. Well,
Agreed.
if you have any questions, you can type them in into our Q&A session. And we learn from the polls, it takes a few seconds.
Yes, absolutely. So, thank you so much for this very interesting conversation today. And I do have a few questions just to kind of put forth to you both. And for the audience, please do, as you think of any, please do submit your questions and we'll be happy to get to those as well. But just curious, it's easy to see this as an HR issue, but it really touches every part of the organization in that how can business leaders outside of HR get involved in closing the experience gap?
David, do you want to take a first step, or shall I start?
You can go ahead, actually.
Um, so I think one of the things I think this is a really important one, and I think one of David's trends in the Deloitte report here is like, what is the role of a manager happening, right? So I think that is a really good question because I think the development and of course what is experience and what is skills is not just the HR. It is also influencing the hiring managers, but also the managers of how to develop and retain your employees. So it's not just being in some ways the hiring manager being stuck of that was my profile and I need the exact same profile to be successful in this role. So that is of course changing and proving of the opportunity of different transferable skills. On the other side, I also think once the employees are onboarded, helping the managers to understand how can we develop team members and colleagues and employees today and guiding them through that career path. And I think there is a lot of education to be done. And the one thing I always like to say is always work on HR becoming a trusted advisor. And I see it changing because of a lot of these challenges we are seeing with organization is actually a talent problem. So I do see that the importance of the CHRO role in the HR team, bringing data and insights of what to actually do and what it means for the business, becoming much more important, which means becoming that trusted advisor, you can also influence quite a bit of those decisions from those people managers, influencing the culture, which of course in return influence the way you're working.
All I'll add to that is I think it's a moment in which this actually shouldn't be too hard to convince your average leader. I think they'll probably get it. That the world is shifting so fast. AI is, for example, just changing so much that how, especially at the executive level, how they got to where they got to is not going to get their next generation of leaders to the same place. And so like you can't start with the same assumptions. My comment off the top about sort of the boundaries getting blurry. You can't start with the same assumptions. It's what will make a good executive 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now is not the same that makes your CEO your CEO. And so if you can just get them to sort of open their eyes, open their ears, their horizons, their imaginations, you can start to then focus on these kinds of questions. Okay, rather than just doing it how we've always done it, let's use the data and the tools available to us to better understand what it was we really needed in the first place.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting way to look at it. And your responses really kind of reinforced the poll that we just saw too from the results from what people are thinking and relating to in their organizations. So appreciate that insight. Along those lines, with the talent issue and problem, how can organizations open doors for more candidates without lowering the bar for success? And speaking to that and what you just said, David, and that what success is going to be different than what it was for perhaps their leaders.
Sure. I mean, one of the examples I didn't spend on that slide where I was talking to cases. I didn't go into them in too great detail, but I'll talk to one of them is a biotech company that that you're going to need to in order to do this, you're going to need to use data. You're going to need to use tools like Eightfold, AI, et cetera. You're going to need to dig in, but that they're an example of an organization that decided just to stop and unpack all of the IT jobs in their organization, like to break them down. What's really going on? What's really needed? And then to turn around, not just to use that to obviously improve kind of underlying job architectures and data models, but to solve these sorts of problems, to use sort of then, okay, how do we then work with our educational partners to better give us that kind of talent? Even if it's not, what it allows us to do is to not ask for that experience, not ask for that degree, to go ask for exactly what it was we really want from our educational partners. And they have been able to significantly expand their horizons to sort of recruit people that they would have, 5 years ago never thought they that would make sense for any role in their organization, let alone some of their more complex IT roles. But it's because it took a little bit of work, but because they, used the tools, worked with some partners to unpack what it was they're looking for, it's expanded their horizons.
Okay, thank you. Well, we do have a question that came in that I know we just have a few minutes left, but I just would like to get to it from Patrick. In your opinion, is the approach to closing the experience gap different in private and public services?
So I'll just say as a short answer, because I've had a chance to talk about this particular trend with both public sector organizations, agencies, and with obviously commercial enterprises. And it resonates with both. And I think that challenges are very similar. We think they're not, but I think there's a lot that's overlapping. I think so. My short answer is I don't think how you're going to solve the problem is that different.
Mhm.
Um, I think sometimes just, access to resources, time horizons, et cetera, might feel different. But the challenge is basically the same. And I think mostly how you're going to solve the problem is going to be very similar. I think the challenge that some of these public sector organizations is that there is more of a need to I'm oversimplifying, but to document everything. So, for example, the job rec means even more. Like you have to kind of spend more time working on underlying job architectures and such. But there's also a recognition that if you can bring science and data to that conversation, I think you can expand those horizons pretty quickly.
Yeah. And Eightfold, for example, works with public sector and private sectors. We do work with the Department of Defense, and we have the gig eager marketplace, which uses the same AI technologies. So similar problem statements of who do we have right today with skills, and what is our short-term needs, and where do we need to deploy and move them to. So there's, I think, to your point, David, obviously there are nuances. Obviously there are some changes around this. But there's also a lot of similarities of the same challenges they see with the talent today.
Well, thank you. Well, unfortunately, we do have to wrap it up here. There are some questions that if we don't get to, rest assured, as I said earlier, we will pass them along to Theresia and David and the folks at Eightfold. So we'll make sure that you get everything answered. So just another thank you so much today for this extremely informative session. Reminder, you can download the slides if you interested in that as well. And then to our HCI members, today's webcast has been approved for HRCI and SHRM credit, as well as for HCI recertification. Your credits for attending this webcast will show up in your My HCI profile under the transcript tab. And while you're there, don't forget to check out hci.org for even more insights, as well as information on our certifications, live conferences, premium membership, and more. So, one more huge thank you to Theresia and David and to the good folks at Eightfold and Deloitte Consulting. I'd like to also thank you, our webcast viewer. Thanks for spending the hour with us, and we'll see you all next time. Thanks, everyone.